So, James Frazer's book, The Golden Bough, looks at ancient mythology. And what's so fascinating is how our lives are ensconced in superstition and magic and kind of cultic phenomena. And the idea is, we're not so far removed from our savage ancestors. I mean, we make idols, we make gods out of things like money or technology or power or this idea that we're scientific and rational, I think would be highly problematic. And so this is about the immense debt owed to our savage ancestors. Frazer says, to students of the past, the life of the old kings and priests thus teems with instruction. In it was summed up all that passed for wisdom when the world was young. It was the perfect pattern after which every man strove to shape his life, a faultless model constructed with rigorous accuracy upon the lines laid down by a barbarous philosophy. Crude and false as that philosophy may seem to us, it would be unjust to deny it the merit of logical consistency. Starting from a conception of the vital principle as a tiny being or soul, existing in but distinct and separable from the living being, it deduces for the practical guidance of life a system of rules which in general hangs well together and forms a fairly complete and harmonious whole. The flaw, and it is a fatal one, of the system lies not in its reasoning, but in its premises, in its conception of the nature of life, not in any irrelevancy of the conclusions which it draws from that conception. And so we can look at the ancient cultures, say, the Greeks with their pantheon of gods on Olympus, or how the Romans borrowed that, or we could talk about the American Indian gods, or we could talk about the Egyptian gods like Ra and Baal and right? I mean, what about stuff like Halloween, Hallows Eve, and our kind of debt owed to the Wiccans and the pagans, right? Hallows Eve. And this idea of kind of Easter and the bunny and the sort of again with the Easter bunny we have a sort of paganism that is carried into modern day, right? Um, so the what he's talking about is the ancient ways of knowing made sense to the tribes and the kind of what he's going to call the savages that practiced these ancient religions. Fraser continues, he says, but to stigmatize, right, to be hostile towards these premises as ridiculous because we can easily detect their falseness would be ungrateful as well as unphilosophical. We stand upon the foundation reared by the generations that have gone before, and we can but dimly realize the painful and prolonged efforts which it has cost humanity to struggle up to the point, no very exalted one after all, which we have reached. Our gratitude is due to the nameless and forgotten toilers whose patient thought and active exertions have largely made us what we are. The amount of new knowledge which one age, certainly which one man, can add to the common store is small, and it argues stupidity or dishonesty, besides ingratitude to ignore the heap while vaunting the few grains which it may have been our privilege to add to it. Fraser argues there is indeed little danger at present of undervaluing the contributions which modern times and even classical antiquity have made to the general advancement of our race, but when we pass these limits, the case is different. Contempt and ridicule or abhorrence and denunciation, right, all these nasty things, are too often the only recognition vouchsafed or guaranteed to the savage and his ways. Yet of the benefactors whom we are bound, thankfully, to commemorate, many, perhaps most, were savages, right? So again, he's creating this idea that we owe our ancestors a great, great debt of gratitude. And even though we might think that, their ways are bizarre and grotesque, and indeed, I mean, they're, um, human sacrifice, child sacrifice, eating grotesque things, and all of the norms and taboos of our culture would have been violated in various ways by savagery. However, right, that was the building blocks. That was the sort of foundation for which civilization could, in a way, take root and grow into be this big, giant forest. Frazer continues, he says, "For when all is said and done, our resemblances to the savage are still far more numerous than our differences from him," right? And I mean, I think that's the point of the reading by Camus on Medici, that, we regress back into the savage. We're not so far removed from our savage roots that, we don't fall into a kind of horrific barbarism and commit atrocities like Medici. So I'll start again. Frazer asserts, "For when all is said and done, our resemblances to the savage are still far more numerous than our differences from him, and what we have in common with him and deliberately retain as true and useful, we owe to our savage forefathers, who slowly acquired by experience and transmitted to us by inheritance those seemingly fundamental ideas which we are apt to regard as original and intuitive." So what he's saying is, we're fools because we stigmatize the savage, but in reality, we have inherited from the savage all of our mores and norms and this kind of slow, perpetual grinding, figuring out reality, and it's sort of moving toward rationality and reason in certain ways, certainly mastery of nature, with physics and mathematical science and that sort of stuff. But really, we regress back into savagery occasionally, and I think that is the point of the Camus reading on Medici, that scientific technology, it can very much, in all its rationality, be utilized as a means of savagery. Frazer argues, "We are like heirs to a fortune which has been handed down for so many ages that the memory of those who built it up is lost, and its possessors for the time being regard it as having been an original and unalterable possession of their race since the beginning of the world. But reflection and inquiry should satisfy us that to our predecessors we are indebted for much of what we thought most our own, and that their errors were not wilful extravagances or ravings of insanity, but simply hypotheses, justifiable as such at the time when they were propounded, but which a fuller experience has proved to be inadequate," right? So again, our ancient savage kin, right, our ancestors, we're just trying to make sense of reality, right? And all of the ancient myths and all of the ancient religions and all of the rites and the rituals and indeed every kind of media or technology grew out of this trying to make sense. Frazer continues, he says, "It is only by the successive testing of hypotheses and rejection of the false that truth is at last elicited. After all, what we call truth is only the hypothesis which is found to work best. Therefore, in reviewing the opinions and practices of ruder ages and races, we shall do well to look with leniency upon their errors as inevitable slips made in the search for truth, and to give them the benefit of that indulgence which we may one day stand in need of ourselves." And I'm not even going to attempt the Latin, but the English translation is, "It is with good reason then that old people must be heard."